Hello there. It's Peter Adkison. How are you? This is Fireside with Peter Adkison. My co-host is Beverly Marshall Sailing. We are on Gen Con TV, and my guest today is Tom Wänerstrand. As you may know if you've watched our show, here we go in search of untold stories from people who are behind the scenes of Magic the Gathering, the early years and the early 90s. And our guest today was there from as close to the beginning as you could possibly get and not be Richard Garfield. And Tom Wänerstrand, welcome to our show.
Yay! Thanks for having me.
Yes.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Wow. So, Magic the Gathering, you did not jump in as an employee. You came in as an artist. But we want to start even earlier than that. Like, Tom, what, before Wizard of the Coast, before Magic, all this stuff, like, what were you doing? And now we're talking about early 90s here, right?
Yeah, early 90s. I was working in the graphics industry.
Yeah.
And I used to work in sign and display industry.
Sign and display.
Yeah, sign and display. So we were doing actual like enameling on steel, like melting glass and putting it down on steel and making signs for parks and zoos and aquariums, working on large art installations.
Wow.
Things like that, working with fine artists.
Right.
On big public commissions.
Right.
Things like that.
Wow.
So, yeah.
And you were pretty young, because you were pretty young when we hired you, so you must, is that?
Yeah, I'm pretty young, I guess. I was in my mid-20s, early 20s, things like that. Yeah.
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 And if I seem to recall, you grew up with the Jesper Mirfors. You knew Jesper Mirfors from an early age or something like that.
Yes, I did. And both my family and Jesper's family, Jesper, of course, the original art director,
yes,
right?
Yes, thank you.
Yes,
in case you don't know Jesper Mirfors, he was the first art director for Magic the Gathering. He worked on other products for Wizard of the Coast before we did Magic, but he was assigned the awesome task of going out and art directing hundreds of Magic cards, with very little budget.
Yeah, for sure. And his family and my family were both Swedish immigrants. And we ended up living a block apart. We lived on the same street.
In Mercer Island?
On Mercer Island, just outside of Seattle.
Right.
People don't know where that is.
Yeah.
Very close.
Yep.
And
out in the middle of a lake.
In the middle of a lake with bridges.
Well, bridges.
Bridges to get to Mercer Island, yes.
Pontoon boats.
Yeah. It's known as nowadays as a place where there are a lot of rich people live.
Yeah.
And back in the day, like working class people could actually live on Mercer Island, which was pretty cool. Yeah. So we grew up a block apart. Our families were very close. We did a lot of things, kind of Swedish Cultural Society kind of things together.
Right.
Almost like a brother to me in some ways.
Right.
And Jesper was responsible for introducing me to role-playing games when Dungeons and Dragons hit the scene in the late 70s.
Right.
We played lots of games together, did a lot of art and drawing together growing up.
Right.
So you were already a gamer before any of the wizard stuff.
Oh yeah. No, I'm a role-playing gamer like from the beginning.
Nice.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Good job.
I figured you'd appreciate that, Peter.
Good job.
Yeah. And you can blame Jesper for that piece too.
Yeah.
So the story is like and then when Jesper had to get all of this art commissioned for the original edition of Magic the Gathering, he tapped into every resource he could find.
Right.
Who do I know who can draw?
Right.
and I was one person on his list of Tom draws.
Well, I know that a lot of the people he hired as artists for Magic were people he went to art school with at Cornish. But did you go to Cornish?
No, I did not go to Cornish.
Did you just learn it, like learn art on your own, basically, or?
largely. I did go to art school briefly.
Okay.
So I originally studied to do like CAD drafting, and
Okay.
Okay.
I was doing technical illustration.
Right.
Is what I had originally studied, and then I got, oh, this is pretty cool. It's doing like exploded engine parts, things like that, you know. And that was,
Did you get to explode any engines?
Exploded as in pulled out so you can see the pieces.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
Well,
no, that
my
would,
mind went somewhere else.
That's different.
that would have been, it would have been fun actually to explode engines. Actually, I exploded engines later on in my career when I like blew up my the engine in my Camaro, but you know, it's another story. So I was doing that, and then I actually attended in a community college and studied art there
Right, okay,
for
right.
a couple of years.
So you got some training.
And got some training there,
right.
and then I had to make
It wasn't
some,
just hanging out with you all
No,
the time
and-
that made you such an excellent artist.
Exactly, but then I had to make some money,
Right.
And so I started
Yeah.
going out and taking odd jobs that kind of, you know, could leverage my skills, and I was painting windows for holiday
Oh,
window
yeah.
decorations for businesses, and I was going out and doing different types of odd jobs, and then I got this job through one of my professors in school, working at this in this sign business.
Yeah.
Right.
And they said, "Oh, you can go and assist these artists in making these, you know, really cool sculptures." And I
Right.
said, "Oh, yeah, sign me up," you know. And did that actually for 2-3 years.
And,
And I really learned a lot there. I learned how to do like color mixing and
Right.
the whole ceramics world, where I'd studied a little bit of that
Right.
in school, you know, and it was really cool. And so then, you know, so I had some training.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And then and Jesper had just tapped into me and said, "Yeah, you want to do some of this illustration work?"
Right,
And I
right.
really, at the time, I said, you know, I'm really not much of an illustrator, but sure.
Well, I'm that's why
Sure,
you only got,
I'll
you
try
only
it.
got 3 pieces in the original Magic,
Yeah.
because you told
Yeah.
Jesper you were. I mean, I always kind of wondered about that, because I think your art's fantastic. I mean, like I in preparing for today's show, I was going back and looking at all of the Magic art that you've done, not just the original, and some of those pieces are incredibly striking, you know, and like vivid. Like I remember, you know, like for some reason, like Arena of the Ancients. I always just, I mean, it's such a simple piece in a way. There's not a lot of stuff that gets in the way. It's very iconic, right? But it's very memorable, and he's like, that's a striking piece, you know. And then from Alpha, of course, let's see, Samite Healer,
Samite Healer,
Royal Assassin,
Royal Assassin,
and
Pirate Ship.
Pirate Ship.
That was my
Pirate Ship.
favorite. Not my very favorite piece in the whole set, but it was.
It's
I
an
had a
excellent
I had a
piece.
deck that was only just the pieces that I really liked the art of, and that was one of them.
Nice,
cool.
nice.
Well,
All 3 of those pieces, by the way, ended up being good in the game too.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, Jesper threw you a solid there.
Yeah.
I don't know if he did that or not, but he gave you good cards.
yeah.
To do, you
Well,
know.
and we had no idea. Any
Right.
of the illustrators, we had no idea what was good or what wasn't, or what things, you know. I'm thinking about like Dan Fraser, and he's like illustrating all these moxes. You
Moxes,
know,
yeah.
and it's like you had no idea.
Right, sure.
So you didn't know what the cards did
Nope.
or anything like that.
No, you know, in the early day, how Jesper liked to run things as far as commissioning art
Right.
is he liked to just give us a brief descriptor.
Yeah.
And in the case of some things, sometimes it was one line, sometimes it was just one word. I think Pirate Ship was just Pirate Ship.
Just
Okay.
pirate ship. I mean, what else do you need to know? It's a pirate ship.
Exactly.
Right? Go from there.
Well, is it up on dry dock?
right.
Is it, you
Well,
know,
Jesper, I remember he was very much a fan of giving the artists as much latitude as possible. And he believed, and I believe he was right, that, you know, the artist just has more room to put their own creativity into it. And he didn't believe in over art directing. And
Yeah, and I think that was some of the strength of the you know, the early sets, was that he did leave it up to the artists, and then the artists themselves really, you know, made all these pieces that, when stitched together, became Magic the Gathering.
Right,
And it had
right.
that, you know, the whole fact that they that the art was, you know, this wide range of styles.
Right.
I think was a pretty cool deal.
Although
you
there
know.
were some issues with his wide-ranging art directing in that sometimes he would not tell people things like, oh, maybe you shouldn't put wings on this because this is not a flying creature.
Right. Well, I think that was all of us as a company even learning. Right. I mean, like Frozen Shade is the creature you're thinking of, you know, and it's like, this creature doesn't fly. It certainly looks like it's flying, right? But that was, we all were like looking like learning how the art needed to match the game mechanics to some level, right?
Right. Yeah.
But do you remember the first conversation do you remember like how Jesper described magic to you or the project or anything about it?
He was super excited, and I don't know if I can't remember whether he called me up or he came over. I went over to his house. Like I said, we lived a block apart.
Right.
I think even at that time, I think we still lived a block apart. And he was really super excited. And he said, Tom, you have to come over and check this out. And I said, okay. And he went into this whole description of what this game was and what he was trying to do from an art direction standpoint. And I was trying to wrap my head around what this thing was, because of course the trading card game didn't exist.
Right, Magic was the first trading card game. Right. Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, all those games were inspired by Magic.
Yeah, so, but he described it as, it's like sports trading cards.
Yeah.
Only it's a game, and there's lots of cards, and we need all these cool illustrations for these cards, and they're going to be, they're going to be full color, and he was really selling it to me,
Right.
And then he went on, and he even showed me some sketches and some other things that he had. Maybe they'd already received from some other artists, maybe some of the people that he was working with from Cornish. And he said, and then he kind of launched into, would you like to do some pieces for this? And I think my first thing I said was, how long do I have? Because I could see he was moving very quickly. Because I was a bit concerned that I wouldn't have the time to actually do any illustration work with work. The paying
day
gig.
Job.
The paying day job.
Right.
But with this not being a particularly paying job.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. $50
At least not
cash,
till later.
Right.
Yeah. And I was also a bit concerned in that I'd done a bunch of illustration work, but not really anything like fully painted, and so I was like, I don't know what the quality's going to be, but okay, if you think it's going to be good enough, I'll do some sketches, So that's kind of how it began.
So you did sketches, and I was looking at your pieces, and it looks like you did watercolor. Is that right?
Yeah. It's acrylic, gouache, watercolor, all water-based paints.
And back in the days when art was done with brushes on canvas.
Yeah.
Which I don't think most of the art's done that way anymore.
I think nowadays it's mostly digital. There's probably some people still working conventionally, but a lot of it's gone digital. But back then we didn't have those tools.
Right.
Photoshop might have existed, but it was like version 1.0
or something, right.
Or whatever, and there were some of these other digital painting tools, they just didn't exist. Back then. It seems like, I'm like, wow, it wasn't that long ago.
How did that affect how you did your cards?
How what? Sorry?
How did that affect how you did the art?
What, in digital tools?
Without digital tools.
So how did you illustrate Magic cards without digital tools, Tom?
Gosh. Conventionally. So, you do.
Oh, when you said you worked with brushes, you mean those actual
like
brushes?
Real brushes,
not the brush icon on the screen.
You do a drawing, and in my case, I would draw right on the illustration board, and then I would paint right over the top of it. So I'd show the drawing to the art director, the actual thing, and they go, "You like that? Yeah, okay," and then I go right on top.
Right.
And there's the finished piece.
And I think the original pieces were about 5 by 7 in size.
Yes.
Is that about right? Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a reason for that. And that was that's what would fit on a scanner, on a flatbed scanner. There was actually a template for the size, like they must be this size, because that's what fits on our scanner. And there's no digital cameras.
Well, and it's also a matter of
Mm-hmm.
making sure
Right.
that it was in portrait mode and
Right.
the right aspect ratio so that it would
Fit
land
in the
right
box.
on
Yeah.
the card.
Yeah.
Has there ever been a piece of magic art in watercolor that you guys remember?
But
yeah, oh, yeah.
watercolors.
Oh,
Yeah. So Chris is asking if we've had watercolor paintings.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I thought yours were watercolor, but now it's acrylic. But
Some are they're mixed media. Mine are, but there are guys like guys and gals like there's like Rob Alexander.
Yeah, I'm about to say, I'm pretty sure
It's all
Rob's are
watercolor.
almost all watercolor.
Drew Tucker. It's
Yeah.
all watercolor.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. Watercolor is really difficult to do well.
Right.
For me, anyway. Very, because you have to commit. And it's very difficult to do well. And so I'm in awe of people who can do watercolor really well, like Rob and Drew
Alexander.
and,
Yeah.
Like, wow.
and many others,
Yeah.
but because I kind of suck at it. I can layer stuff on the top, but the
But,
actual pure watercolor,
So how do you feel about the pieces that you did? Let's stay focusing on the first three because we're starting there.
I think they're fairly pedestrian. I feel one of the things I tried to do with.
But I don't. I think they're. I mean, I think maybe some of it's nostalgia, but
But you have memories attached to them, Peter.
I do have memories attached to them, but I look at them and I think even now I play Magic. I played some Magic recently with old cards, and so I didn't draw a Royal Assassin, but I had a Samite Healer and a Pirate Ships, and you see these pieces, and they're nice pieces of art. You should feel proud of them.
Yeah, no, thank
I'm
you.
especially considering where we all were in our career at the time, and everything, small company.
Yeah, and no one knew what this thing was going to be, right? No, we didn't know. I didn't, I actually thought, I was like, oh, it seems like a fun thing to.
Right.
This is a fun thing to actually do some little paintings, and I wasn't expecting to get anything out of this beyond the little bit of
$50.
the $50.
Yeah, I was about to say,
that
it's
was
not
paid.
like you were getting paid enough to spend hours and hours and hours at it,
Yeah, the original Magic was. I remember
Yeah.
we paid $100, but half of that was in equity. It was in
Right.
the coast.
Yeah.
and $50 in cash.
Yeah.
and
So
I
we
think
got
most artists just figured that it was $50 in cash.
It was $50 in cash, and then we got $50 worth of stock in a
Right.
company that could be worthless. So I was like, okay. And it's kind of an interesting thing.
Right.
Jesper was super confident from the beginning, though. He said this thing is going to be worth a ton,
Right.
and you're going to be thankful you did this. And he was like super positive, and he knew it.
Right.
It really amazing.
What was he said? The best thing since Danish cheese.
Exactly. Danes make some
I
awesome
know.
cheese. Yeah. So, but in the art end, one thing I tried to do with my art is because I knew this were getting reproduced the size of a postage stamp,
Yeah.
and I said, you really have to make it stand out. So you really can't put a ton of detail in there. There's some art out there, not just Magic and but other brands, there's a lot going on in a very small space, and it's very hard to read. And so I tried to make it very simple and focus in on the subject and make the background kind of go away. And so as a result, the art tends to be
Iconic. It pops.
yeah, it's kind of, but it can also be static, and it's and it isn't.
But I think
It's hard to make a ship static.
Yeah,
I mean,
you lean it a little.
Yeah, lean it a little bit. Yeah, exactly.
Put a little wind in the sails.
Yeah.
But I do think, I do think that there was, I think that sometimes more contemporary fantasy art can look really busy, and there's just so much to go on. Your eye isn't quite sure where to go. You're not quite sure what's important. And I think that the earlier Magic art being more iconic was, here's the thing that you're looking at, and everything else, and the background's often just kind of blurry or kind of dull in comparison. You know instantly what the piece is. You look at Samite Healer, and you know this guy. You know what that is. Royal Assassin.
You know what that is.
You know what that is.
Right.
The guy's lurking, and the pirate ship are all. Anyway, I think they're all excellent pieces.
Yeah, well, thanks. And but you can see it too when you look at before this art is like cut down into cards. It's on these press sheets, right? These
Right.
big sheets of paper. And seeing all the cards laid out on a press sheet, you can see that like the older art, you know, how iconic it is. It's really standing out, all those pieces, versus like a modern press sheet where it's, you know, it's a bit more busy.
Right.
You know.
Right.
So, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Did Jesper give you any, you know, a lot of feedback on stuff, you know, or did he just kind of say, "Woohoo, that's fine with me," you know?
There was a lot of woohoo. There's a lot of woohoo. That's cool. I think he's very open. Now, he gave some feedback. He told me one time, I did a piece this years later, and I did a piece for a set. It was like Portal or something like that, you know, or Starter Magic, and he goes, "I have to tell you, Tom, that's pretty weak." and I'm like, "Thanks a lot, dude."
Very specific.
Yeah. So then I got feedback like that. I'm like, oh, okay. It's like crawl back and rework. I'll crawl back and rework a couple things.
Throw for a handkerchief. I can just whip
try
out
to
right
make
now.
my art director happy. Yeah. So he wasn't afraid to give some harsh feedback, but that was kind of, you know, how he would do it. And usually he's like, "That looks cool. Perfect. Go."
Right.
You know.
Right.
Do you want another piece? You know, and that kind of thing. And
So you've gone on from there, and you've done a lot of art pieces over the years. I mean, I was kind of surprised when I went up and looked.
I know, I went and I counted them a couple years ago or something too, and I was surprised as well. So I went on
about how many? I didn't actually.
It's like
count.
over 60.
Yeah, I was thinking 50. So yeah.
Yeah, it's like 60 some odd.
Over 6 pieces of art. Now, have you done one? What's the most recent? I mean, do you still do them once in a while, or has it been?
I still draw for
many
myself.
Years? I mean, for
now, but as far as published stuff for Magic, I haven't done any since was the set Time Spiral.
Was that?
And when that was, 2004 or 5, somewhere in there, something, you know. So really, I was doing
10,
art
15
for
years.
Yeah, I was doing art for about a 10-year span there,
Right.
And then over a variety of different art directors, right, over the years,
Right.
that have worked on the brand.
So which other art directors, real quick?
So we had Jesper first, then Sandra Everingham.
Sandra Everingham, yes.
Was art director for a while.
Yeah.
There's Jeremy Cranford.
Yep, Jeremy Cranford.
There
Yeah.
was Sue-Ann Harkey.
Okay.
There was
All right. Well,
maybe another Jeremy Jarvis later also, and some other guys. Yeah. So there's a number of different art directors, but there's been many of them over the years. Yeah.
Well, we should get into you actually going and working at Wizards of the Coast full time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at what point did you get hired? Like, I think it was pretty early.
My first exposure after doing artwork was in your basement.
Yes.
Sorting artwork with Jesper. And I remember I remember putting them up on a whiteboard.
Right.
In like on your couch.
Right.
Or,
Yep.
Back in the basement days.
In the basement days.
Literally was the basement of my house.
I know
the
exactly
basement.
which couch you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Jesper had asked for some help to kind of sort through the art. Which ones do we have? Which ones do we not? What are we missing? Etc. And so that was my first really exposure where I was like, whoa, this is really a thing. Beyond me doing
was
some.
that alpha or was that later?
Yeah, it's alpha.
That was alpha, right?
It was alpha art.
Yeah.
Sorting art in the basement. And I think I came over once or twice or something at that time.
Right.
And then some time went by.
And so, by the way, just for those listening, so the sorting of the art in the basement. So that would have been before Magic was published originally. Would have been early in 1993. That would have been February, March, April 1993, because Magic came out in July, August. So we would have had to have all the art done, finished by May, June. And not much earlier than that. The first pieces.
Yeah, we pushed that one.
The first pieces of Magic art I saw that were completed, I remember, was at Jesper's family Christmas
Yes.
party.
Right.
They had
That was a thing.
That was, and I had no idea I was going to see it.
Yeah,
and I don't know if you were there. And thinking about it, it was surprising if you weren't there.
I think I was probably there.
You probably passed out drunk somewhere.
too much glug.
Glug. Oh, I love glug.
You like glug?
Yeah, I love
Swedish
glug.
mulled wine.
Yes.
Oh man, that was good. But,
Yeah, so I went over to his house, and they invited me to this party, and Jesper was like, "Hey, come downstairs for a second." You're like, okay. So we went downstairs, and he had, I think it was 12 pieces, mostly Anson Maddox, I think, and Mark Tedin pieces, who were, both did a lot of pieces for original Alpha.
Because they could crank them out.
Yeah, they could crank them out. They were a lot faster, evidently. Than
they're a lot faster than me.
Well, maybe they didn't have a day job distracting them.
That's entirely possible.
Right, who knows? So, yeah, okay, so you helped him sort magic art.
Yeah, magic art in the basement, basement days. And so, early in 93. And then some time went by, I turned in my pieces, and some time went by, and then Jesper said, "Oh yeah, we've done a first printing, and we're gonna the product's gonna come out here pretty soon." And I think sometime before the launch, we all gathered again at his house, and I remember he handed out alpha decks to everyone in the room.
Wow.
And we sat around, and I was, we actually get to see the product, right? And it busted
so
them open.
Everybody, you remember, was that other artists? That evidently, right? Probably Anson and Mark. And
there was
Sandra
other artists there. There was other, I want to say that maybe there was some, I don't know if you were there. Lisa was there.
Possibly. Yeah. I don't remember it, but boy, there's a lot I don't remember now. Yeah.
But talk about just handing out alpha decks like candy.
So what was that like seeing? Seeing the cards.
Pretty amazing. Yeah. And the first thing is that and then those were they were randomized, right?
Yes.
Those decks. And so I remember opening decks trying to find my cards.
Trying to find your cards.
And two of them are rare. Right? So I didn't.
Pirate ships and Royal
Yeah.
Assassins.
I don't think I found any of my cards. I think I found a Samite Healer because it's a common card.
Right.
And I was like, oh, where are my cards at? And they go, there's one. Okay. Yeah,
that's hilarious.
We sat there and
are you sure? Well, it was that sorting job,
And I don't even know. Richard may have even been there because I remember asking, and seeing the cards and everything else. And I was like, oh, okay, so you got these random decks, and I had the gist of how this thing plays, right?
Right.
And I was like, but what's to stop the person from just going and buying the best deck, right? And Richard said, he goes, this thing called ante, because you have to ante up all of your cards. That's what, a card every time you play, and you might lose these great cards that you have collected or whatever.
There was this narrow window in the history of Magic the Gathering where people played for ante. Ante was not a very popular rule, and it got dropped. I think most Magic players don't even know it existed. So maybe I should explain. In the very earliest release of Magic the Gathering, when you play, let's see, Beverly and I are playing a game, we would shuffle our decks, cut, and then you would take from each deck, you'd flip over the top card, and that was the ante. And whoever won that game got to keep, permanently keep, the two cards that got anteed up. And
it didn't matter if you're putting up a common card or the other guy's putting up a rare card. That's just the luck of the draw.
And there was a dynamic where people who were really good at Magic would build decks out of common cards and go beat people who had more expensive. It was exactly like Richard said, but of course, when the really good people also had really good cards, then those decks were kind of unbeatable eventually. So eventually we had to put together rules for how to avoid this problem,
But exciting thing, right? To get these decks of cards. This thing is actually a real thing.
Right.
Really amazing, and it was kind of cool to hear it from Richard, just to say, this is, look at this creation I did. Yeah.
It's got to be especially fun for the artist because your name is actually on the card. I mean,
know.
Nobody else's name is on the card.
I know, I'm published.
Everybody knows this is your one.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. It's that's fun part of this show is walking back memory lane with and remembering and asking people that come on to our show, asking you what was it when you first saw the cards?
These first memories, right? I can just vividly see it. Opening the decks. Really amazing.
Yeah.
My wife also, her Andrea, her claim to fame, we weren't married at the time, but her claim to fame was that Richard taught her how to play magic, which is true, and I think it may have been at this particular event that we sat down and actually, this is how it works, and taught her, and yeah, I thought that was pretty cool.
Wow.
She's like, oh yeah, Richard taught me, man.
So you did some other work, I think, for Wizards outside of illustration. I think you worked on the Duelist magazine before you got hired.
Yeah,
Is that right?
and so then this thing launched, blew up.
Yeah.
It was becoming started to do additional pieces of artwork.
Right.
For other sets. I think the Arabian Nights was the next thing. I did.
Yeah.
Well, I did one whole card for that.
Right. Do you remember which card it was?
Merchant ship.
Oh,
Because
another
the
ship.
ships.
Because it's a
Because
ship.
ships, because I became known as ship guy.
Ship guy.
Like Jesper liked the pirate ship, and so I became
Ship
ship
guy.
guy.
It's good to have a niche.
I know.
It is.
And so I've done quite a few.
I know.
ships
I was
for the
looking
game.
at a merchant ship.
Yeah.
You've
Ghost
done
ship, skeleton ship,
ship shape. No,
etc. etc. There are a number of ships there.
Go down with the ship.
Yeah.
Yes.
But then there was the first Duelist magazine was being put together by Jesper and I think Catherine
yes.
in those
Catherine
days.
Catherine Haynes,
Haynes,
Yes,
yeah.
right.
And they were working in Jesper's basement. There were a lot of basements in early Magic.
Yes.
Early history of Wizards of the Coast.
Right.
Not so much seeing the sun or anything.
It's all castles and towers.
Yes, exactly. Bottom end, the dungeon.
Right.
And they were working on Duelist magazine, so I helped them out there. And that was my first, I had in my exposure to this whole display industry, I had some exposure there to pre-press.
Right.
In working on Macs and doing typesetting and things like that. I actually had some chops there, and that was like the dawn of desktop publishing. Like it was a new thing,
Yes.
right? And so Jesper said, hey, you've got some chops there. we could use some help. So I worked with Catherine and Jesper in his basement putting together the first Duelist magazine.
So you're doing, were you helping them like do graphic design and layout for it, right?
Yeah, design and layout.
Design and layout.
Yep.
Well, and that was a pretty heavily laid out magazine.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I was looking. I have a copy of it because it's the only one I ever have actually had a piece in.
Right.
It's the purple one,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
With the the Arabian Nights focus, because that was the launch.
Yes.
It was supporting.
Yep.
So this would be the end of '93.
We got on that pretty early.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
Jesper and Catherine, I think, really deserved the lion's share of the credit for, saying they had the passion for it. Like in many organizations, it's when somebody gets real passionate about something that can go a long way towards it getting done, right? And so, they wanted to do this magazine, and boy, I remember Catherine saying about killed her, but
Well, and it wasn't just like you get a regular magazine. It's like here's some text on a white background, and maybe there's some borders or something. There were fancy backgrounds and fancy top fonts and fancy borders and fancy.
Jesper wanted every page to look like a work of art.
And,
we were painting that thing with ink. It was like, as they say in the biz, heavy coverage.
Heavy coverage.
Heavy coverage of ink. Oh yeah, everything was hand painted backgrounds, other things in this magazine. Yeah, it was really amazing.
All right, so we're halfway through our time and you haven't got hired yet. So let's
let's get moving.
let's go.
Let's get moving along. So then later on, so I'd done some work with Jesper and so on, and he had said another. I think we're in early 1994, and he said, would you consider going and working for Wizards of the Coast? This thing's blowing up. We're hiring, and I said, well, if you can. I thought about it for a while, for a couple seconds, and I thought this actually looks like a cool gig, right? And I said, if you can match what I'm making today, I'll take you up on that.
Right.
And he came back. I guess he went and talked to you, perhaps.
Yeah.
I don't know. He came back like one day later and said, "We'll match your salary." And I think it was some ridiculously low amount of money.
Right.
I'm like, "Is that all they're going to pay me?" No, but and I considered
Well, you got
it
a
for
raise since then, right?
Oh yeah, there's been one since then.
Yeah.
And
So
they.
what were you hired to do? What was your first job at Wizards of the Coast?
So what he was looking for was production management, and I had some experience in doing production management, and that's what they wanted.
And what is production management?
So-
or what did it turn out to be? What did that job end up being at Wizards of the Coast?
Yeah, it's working with supply partners to physically produce the products. So
Okay.
there's a lot of coordination. I'd mentioned that I'd done some pre-press work, so there's a lot of coordination in pre-press, electronic file handoff, vetting of materials,
Okay.
some packaging design and things. There wasn't much of that in the early days because it was
Right.
like a tuck box
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
booster wrap, right?
Right.
But mostly preparation of files for handing off for production,
Right.
and working with the vendors to ensure that it gets properly produced. That's production management in kind of a nutshell.
So in the case of Wizards of the Coast, in the early to midnight 1994-ish, for Magic the Gathering, that the vendors would have been Cardamundi.
Yeah.
Right? So Cardamundi, which was our first printer of Magic cards and packaging.
Yep.
They at least then, I'm not sure about these days, but they were a turnkey sort of supplier for us in the sense that they either did themselves or hired out from them, sort of, invisible to us, right? Buy the paper, get the packaging all done. And so they would send to us these big sheets of clear guidelines, if you will, or
Yep.
a die line?
A die line.
A die line.
Yeah, you
I
got
remember
it.
the word.
Yeah.
And we would scan, but it wasn't digital yet. We would have to create a digital graphic design file based on what this. And if you imagine, if you took a deck box that Magic decks come in, and if you took it apart and laid it out flat, that's what the die line was.
Yep.
Yeah. And so you have to kind of understand where all the pieces would end up when it was all folded together.
Which side should be right side up?
Yeah, which side should be right side up.
Which
right?
panel is facing forward?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Where does the barcode go? All these things where if you don't,
Or just leave it off.
Yeah, or just leave
In
it
the case of the alpha starter deck box, I don't think there was a barcode, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
things you
So,
figure out
so you would work with the graphic designers, or maybe you did some of the graphic design yourself, to create those files.
yes,
And then send them to an agency to create films, right? Send
Yes.
them to like CMYK or someplace like
Yep.
this, right?
Correct.
Who would take that digital file, turn it into films, and send it to Cardamundi, and just kind of managing that piece of.
that's right, exactly.
Yeah.
And in those days, everything was we call it nowadays we call it analog versus digital.
Right,
Everything's
right.
digital process now.
Right.
But back then it was analog film. So we would digitally lay out these cards,
Right.
which was again cutting edge of digital pre-press,
Right.
at the time.
Right.
I remember the original Magic cards were typeset on like a Commodore
Yeah,
computer
Dave
by
Howells.
Dave Howell.
Yeah, he's Amiga.
Yeah,
Amiga.
That's
Amigo.
right, an Amiga.
Yes. Yes.
Not a mainstay in pre-press, even at the time. It was kind of whatever worked.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
And then they would be, finished little files, and we would lay them out in these die line grids,
Right.
and send them off and actually get film made and made locally.
Right.
And I know you guys have been
And then-
talking to Jefferson in the past year, and that's kind of the work that he did. Yeah, we'd make film, and then we would ship it
To Cardamundi.
to Belgium.
Belgium. Now I seem to recall. I will find out if this is a true story or not. Like I seem in the Magic lore, there is a story that one time our deadline was so tight that you actually got on a plane with a bunch of films and flew them to Belgium.
Yeah, in my
to deliver
hand
them.
in my hand luggage.
In your hand luggage.
Well, you're not
Dave-
going to check that.
No, it's a big flat because you can't roll this stuff either, or at least you shouldn't.
Right.
And I had this big like portfolio bag,
Right.
you know, like like an artist's portfolio thing. You know, you'd have your
Right.
big oil painting in or something like that. And you know, hand carried film over to Belgium
to
in
get
order
our deadline.
to
They,
meet the
they
deadline.
needed it the next day.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so it's a true story. I wonder what set that was. It was probably you know, who
man.
knows.
It was-
antiquities, legends, something like that.
Somewhere
Yeah.
in there.
Somewhere there.
Early
Somewhere
days.
Yeah. Early days.
Yeah, but you know, you do what you have to do, you know,
Yeah,
to get
right.
the work done, and that at the end of the day, that was my responsibility. So I was all right, just hop on a plane, get a ticket, and off you go, right?
So, you've been doing this for a long time now, though. I mean, I don't want to skip the next 20 some years.
No,
but
yeah, well, I've been
you've been
in the hobby game industry now, since then, 25 years.
wow. So this turned out to be your career. It's kind
Yeah,
of-
I did, and
yeah.
you know, I was saying that to somebody the other day. I was saying, you know, it turns out you can make a career out of this business. You know,
Right. Right.
and who knew?
Yeah.
Well, we kind of hoped, but
I know.
Yeah, no, exactly. And you know, my stepsister, she had told me years ago when I was playing Dungeons and Dragons. You know, she's like Tommy, because she calls me Tommy. She's one of the few people who can call me Tommy.
Right.
But she said,
It's already updated.
yeah, and she said, Tommy, what do you got to do something with your life? What are you going to do with Dungeons and Dragons? You're never going to do anything with your life playing that game. Aha.
Yeah. I assume you've not let her forget that.
Oh no,
Yeah.
I did not.
Right,
I did
right.
absolutely not. No.
So, so you're working at Wizards now?
I'm working at Wizards now. I did leave Wizards for a while. I left
Right.
for 5 years, and I worked for a variety of different people on the production side. But I stayed in the hobby
Tabletop games.
business, tabletop hobby game business.
Right.
Working for manufacturers and other publishers.
Right. When you say manufacturers, are you talking about like printers?
Yeah,
Or-
like
or-
the Cardamundis of the world and
Yeah.
other folks like that.
Right.
Yeah, I worked for a company out of just outside of London called Games and Print Services. Worked there for a while. I contracted and worked for Cranium,
Right.
for
nice.
the Cranium company for a while, who before they were gobbled up by Hasbro.
Right. Right.
happens to the best of us.
Yeah, you know, all the good companies, right? Yeah, but it kind of stayed in that in this industry, you know, from the beginning. And then they lured me back to Wizards again,
Right.
doing largely the same kinds of things. You know, I've been kind of on the production end my entire career,
Right.
and it's become kind of a specialized thing.
Right.
Turns out there aren't too many people out in the world who have like an expertise in like card collation.
Right.
You know, just
Yeah.
complex card sorting,
Now,
and
card collation
equipment
sorting.
and so on. Yeah,
And I think what you're talking about here is that, you know, Magic cards, when you buy a booster pack of Magic cards or a deck of Magic cards, the cards are on a surface level appear to be somewhat random and what cards are in which booster, but they're not truly random. There's, you know, achieving true randomness is very difficult, it turns out, right? There is some sort of, now I remember Cardamundi had these sorting machines that would sort the cards and change how cards were routed out, and then it would go into piles based on common cards, uncommon cards, and rare cards, and to build a booster pack, you grab cards from each of these three piles. Is that still how it's done?
basically.
Yeah.
You know, over the years, the equipment's changed and the capabilities have expanded and so on. But you know, it's more or less how it's still done.
Yeah.
You know, you got to print these things, and then you've got to get them randomly collated and then loaded into and packaged. It turns out you don't want it truly random, perfectly
Right.
random, because then bad things happen.
Right.
Yeah, you want to be able
yeah.
to have the right land to cast some of the spells that
sure.
you have. Otherwise, that's
You
just
want
bad.
some predictability within your randomness.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's the secret sauce
Yeah.
to the whole thing, right?
I have one of my experiences and stories about early Magic before we discovered Card Monday, and we were like, how do we randomize these cards? We knew it was possible that sports cards were doing it, but we didn't want to go to any of the companies making collectible cards because we didn't want them to steal our idea.
Yeah.
And I remember, so we're like, well, how do we get these cards randomized? And Kim McLaughlin, I remember him drawing on a napkin, and gosh, I wish we still had it. He designed this, this conveyor belt idea where the Magic cards would come off of this conveyor belt and then go into one of these blowers, like an lotto machine, right?
Like
a big blower. So these cards would go, and then you just reach in and grab some cards and stuck them in packs, right? Oh my gosh, it's like, thank goodness we found Card Monday.
Oh man. Yeah, well, I think you did well to find a good partner. We still work with them today.
Yeah, well, they're still doing it.
They are actually, as far as Wizards of the Coast goes, one of the longest partners.
Yeah,
25 years. If not the longest.
Yeah.
It's really amazing.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, it was many years before we worked with anybody else other than Card Monday for print buying. But it's great. I always have a fond place in my heart for Luke Mertens, who was the guy there, who good old Luke, who introduced us. We had no idea what we were doing at all. I mean, no idea. Before, we didn't even have you before. Like before you came on board, I remember. Mark Reinhagen at White Wolf is the one who introduced me to Luke Mertens at
really?
Gen Con.
I did not know that.
It was Gen Con in 1992. As we were a year into developing Magic, we were getting more and more sort of desperate, if you will, trying to figure out how are we going to manufacture these things. And it got to a point where I started asking people in the industry. I didn't go to the sports card people because I was really scared they would steal it, but I started talking to friends that I had made in tabletop gaming. And at Gen Con in 1992, Mark Reinhagen comes up to me and says, I found your guy. I'm like, what? I found the guy who can print what you need. And he takes him over and went over to the White Wolf booth, and I met Luke Mertens, and he took me to lunch, and I explained what I made him play Magic. I had prototype cards. I made him play. So it says, and Luke's like, I don't play games.
Yeah.
I make them, but I don't play them. Says, Luke, you got to play this game, otherwise you're not going to understand.
Yeah.
And so he did.
So he played?
He played.
Yeah.
I made him play Magic with me.
That's pretty cool.
And they said, we could do all that. Even so, we can do that. We can do. I was explaining about the sorting and all this stuff like that. So
he's a bit of a legend in Cardamundi circles as the guy who brought collectibles into their business. On a hunch.
Right.
Like, I'm sure he was wondering, do these guys have any money? They pay for?
We didn't.
But I say it was a good thing to wonder.
He did require that we didn't get credit with Card Monday at the beginning.
Small hobby companies are not exactly like a hotbed of investor cash.
Right. Exactly.
At least they weren't back then.
But we were talking about packaging earlier, right? I remember, just as a statement, this is embarrassing in terms of how naive we were. But I remember we were all entirely 100% focused in the beginning on just making cards.
Yeah.
And I remember we had signed up Luke, and he said, okay, we're going to do that. And then, I reached out to him about 4 months later, around November, December. I said, okay, we want to, do you remember me? We talked to Gen Con.
I have your card.
I have this. yes. I was dialing internationally this card. And, we talked about it, and he says, well, what are you going to do for packaging? And I'm like, packaging? Yeah. Good.
We have to make that.
Good question. and just immediately, like, I have no idea how to make packaging. Like, we don't know how we're going to package this, right?
Yeah.
And he talked me through this idea of, well, we knew we wanted decks, and we knew we wanted booster packs, and that the deck would have the rules, there's a little rules booklet in with the other cards, because the rules are going to be simple. Most of the rules would just be on the cards.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So
the little rule book that was in the decks, right? The little
rule book.
With the tiny type
Tiny print.
that just about killed my eyes trying to proofread.
Yes, right. I'm not surprised. So he So he said, well, if you have a point of purchase display? I didn't know what a point of purchase display was, right? He says, it's like a box that you put these decks in or these boosters in. And I said, well, that sounds interesting. And so he sent me, pictures of what they would look like and these die lines. And we had no idea, right? And so it made sense once he explained it, of course. And it was like, well, obviously we have to have this. We got to do this. And so, and so Jesper went off and worked with you apparently on doing the graphic design of those boxes. Don't get the deer in the headlights look there. Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you.
No, I think the original ones I wasn't too involved in, but certainly subsequent ones. But the it's really Card Money kind of borrowed from the whole trading card industry, like sports trading cards. But really, they set the standard for what a trading card game ended up being. Which is very interesting to me in that and they're like, it's going to be like sports trading cards. They're going to be in, we call it flow wrap. That's the booster wrap is the technical term.
Well, it's funny because I think it was Luke Mertens. It might have been somebody else. Came to me years later because at Wizards, we went and patented certain aspects of a collectible card game, trading card game. The tapping and stuff like that. And somebody said, Peter, what you really should have done is patent the packaging of how a trading card game gets packaged. And it's like, oh, okay, well, hindsight's. But anyway.
No, absolutely. And there's other kind of cool things in that like Card Monday. The reason that Magic cards are 63 by 88 millimeters is that's a European poker size. It's not an American poker size, it's a European poker size. But it became a standard in the industry, even if for a lot of companies, even if they were making cards elsewhere, outside of Europe.
Because the card sleeves came shortly after the card. Magic came out, all of a sudden you got these collectible cards. Immediately people started taking these cards and putting them in like Ultra Pro type binders and stuff like that.
So that's a Euro standard.
Some
other things like Magic cards are on playing card paper, playing card board, and that's a special kind of paper.
Well, I remember talking when I was explaining the idea for Magic to Luke. I was like, "This is really important. These are packaged, sorted like baseball cards, but they're going to play like." Poker cards, and I want casino quality poker cards on these things. And that, fortunately, lucky enough that we talked to the right guy, the right company, and they gave us, quality playing cards.
Well,
Magic cards are quality playing cards.
Yeah, so you went to a playing card company, right, to get that, and that's that's different than trading cards.
Right.
Trading cards aren't on that that paper.
Yeah, they're not.
Well, they're not meant to be shuffled
or they're just meant
handled
to be,
a lot.
But I'm thankful that we knew that at the time.
Yeah.
That we were, and Richard, I'm sure contributed to this discussion that, that these had to be playing cards.
So there's all kinds of little things like that kind of set the standard for what the Magic and other games of its ilk ended up being, which is kind of cool if you look at the history there,
Do we have any questions, Kristen, from the audience? Oh, we got it.
So I have one more question.
Yes.
Which is, in sort of going forward after doing some of this, and I know you're still doing it too, but are you going to have more fond memories of doing the art or of doing the production management? I mean,
I think I'm reminded of the art all the time because Magic's more popular than ever right now. And now there are younger generations of Magic fans that send cards to me, get signed, or do alters, or do things, or invitations to go do signing events of those types of things. And so I'm reminded that the whole art piece is pretty cool, and I don't think anybody's gonna let me forget it. On that end, and I am very proud of the artwork that I've done, and also of all all the other work that I've done in kind of the day job over the years. It's pretty cool. It's an interesting career, I think. I don't know. Some people might say no, not really.
Well,
but
it's hard. It's hard work. I mean, what you do, it's understanding all the requirements for the paper, for the sorting, for inks. You probably
I know. You're just learning on the fly, and a lot of this.
Recyclable packaging.
But learning it in time and building upon that knowledge and turning it into a career over years.
Well, as
you are an expertise in this now.
Yeah, after a while you pick up all these things and they've become this body of knowledge, right? But like you had mentioned earlier, we were pretty naive in the early days.
We were really naive.
Really, and we didn't know anything, and we were just figuring it out.
We didn't know that we couldn't do it.
Exactly.
Right.
It's like, sure, this is possible. And, but we managed, I think, you started that and some of the rest of us carried on of aligning ourselves with the right people to guide it along and get it where it needed to go, right?
We're almost out of time. I don't know if you got one more story that you could dredge up from the early
man.
To put you on the spot. Oh, what?
Yeah, we have a question.
You have a question?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
So for Paul, and Peter, you might need to repeat me so everyone can hear.
For Tom. That's okay, Barbara. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. Poll was last week.
I'm Barbara. What is your favorite piece of art that you've done and of someone else's in terms of magic art?
Ooh.
So she's asking what your favorite piece of art is that you've done and or other pieces of art.
My favorite piece of art that I've done is Blood Moon.
Oh,
yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Which is also
Legends?
the Dark.
The Dark.
Yeah,
The Dark.
yeah.
Yes, the Dark. Right.
Because it's the closest to kind of my painting style that I do for me.
Okay.
That's why.
Right.
And so I like that piece. It also happens to be a popular piece.
Right.
As well, due to gameplay,
Right.
Is usually how it rolls,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that's my favorite personal piece, and then another artist. Oh boy. I'd say I had mentioned him earlier. I love. There's so many great artists. Even the current ones.
It's
there's,
not
there's-
really a
there's-
fair question.
I know.
Is it?
There's amazing. All these amazing artists out there. But I really like. I had mentioned him earlier. Rob Alexander.
Yes.
And Rob Alexander, his Underground Sea. That
Beautiful.
piece.
That is-
I tried to buy it. And Jesper kept it, and I tried to buy that piece because I love it so much. And then I learned later that he sold it to some, I'm like, oh, dude.
That piece is such a beautiful piece, and I remember it so well as being, like, we saw lots of really cool art that came in, and I remember that then that piece came in like, oh, this is beautiful art,
Right.
as opposed to cool or edgy or interesting. It was just absolutely a gorgeous piece. And of course, we did many other gorgeous pieces after that.
But that was the kind of piece that
first
you could
time.
put up in your house with, regular art
Right.
that isn't, from games, and people would not
Yes.
think, oh, that's out of place.
Stack up
Wait a minute, there's no
regular art.
regular art. There's no. Those aren't the usual demons hanging on your wall.
Right. No, we all know what you mean.
Yeah, it is beautiful, and he paints. Rob could probably paint a pretty good demon too, but he paints some amazing landscapes.
Oh, yeah, his
and
landscapes are incredible.
these like fantasy landscapes are pretty cool. Yeah. So that.
All right, you guys have too much fun back there. Any other comments for me?
It's always fun back
It's always fun back there. Oh, good.
Yeah, cool.
All right, well, I think we're getting close to our time limit for today. Thank you, Tom. It's really good to have you
Thanks
here.
for having me, Peter,
Absolutely.
Beverly.
And thank you all for joining us today on Gen Con TV, Fireside with Peter Adkison. Thanks to my co-host, Beverly Marshall Sailing, and to our guest, Tom Wänerstrand. And also thanks to our sponsor, Chaldea, my other company, thanking myself, I suppose. We're filming at the Anvil, which is the Chaldea Film Studio where we build sets. And hopefully next year we'll actually come out with our Chaldea series. And so anyway, we're doing that down here. And thanks to Kristen and Will for putting this show together and for us being on Gen Con TV. Next week, our guest will be Lisa Stevens, who played a big role in the history of Magic the Gathering back in the 90s and has gone on to do many glorious things on her own, most notably Paizo, her company she started, and a little company called Paizo. And by the way, Paizo, thank you for your business. We appreciate your sponsorship and participation at Gen Con. Anyway, so we will hope that you will come back next week, Wednesday at noon again, and join us for having Lisa on the show. And in the meantime, we have other shows on this channel. Table Takes, where we recap industry news in the world of tabletop gaming over the prior week. That's Fridays at 11 o'clock in the morning Pacific time. And then also we have the Brothers Murph. Those are a fun couple of guys, let me tell you. They're coming in on Mondays at 5 p.m. So come back and see us, and otherwise have a good week, and we'll see you next week.
All right, bye.
Yay.